Hey guys, Level Cap here, and today we're talking about G2A. It has to be done, people. This video has been a long time coming, and the recent debacle with TinyBuild has really been the tipping point for me. For those of you unfamiliar with G2A, it's a website that sells gray market game keys. These are keys that don't come directly from publishers, but are instead keys resold by various third parties through G2A's online platform. For example, you might buy a video card that also comes with a free game key. If you don't want that game, you can post it on G2A and sell it to make a little bit of money. The problem, of course, is that not properly regulated, these types of transactions can end up exploiting the game industry while making massive profits from stolen game keys and using global keys to price gouge retail markets. G2A and other gray market websites are not only failing to regulate these transactions, but have also mastered the art of their exploitation, taking a novel idea and using it for the worst possible means. The recent stolen key fiasco with indie developers TinyBuild is just one example of what has been going on for years. For a couple of months, tinybuild.com was running their own online game store. However, their store was shut down when they started getting hit with thousands of chargebacks. This is when someone buys a game with a stolen credit card, and then the credit card company finds out and takes the money back. The problem, of course, is that the product, the game key, has already been delivered. Chargebacks can occur 30 to even 60 days after the purchase. The consequences of these chargebacks are that the game developers do not see any return on their product. Not to mention they actually have to pay for the chargeback fee if they don't catch it in time. Now, the thieves who have stolen the game keys are not necessarily interested in playing the game, but rather reselling these keys on websites like G2A, which makes it extremely easy to turn a quick profit. Listing the game keys for half of the retail price guarantees a very quick sale and can usually be done before the keys themselves are invalidated by the publisher. And even without a quick turnaround, many publishers don't have a system to track the keys in order to invalidate them, but in light of mounting chargeback scandals, many are implementing systems to do so. The damage that this kind of scam creates is then twofold. Game developers not only don't see a return on fraudulently purchased games which are then sold on other sites, but they also have to spend a lot of resources tracking fraudulent CD keys and canceling credit card transactions before they're hit with chargebacks, which is actually a very resource-intensive process. And unfortunately, websites like G2A have made this kind of scam so easy that it has become widespread enough to ruin smaller game companies like TinyBuild. Now, TinyBuild was able to obtain sales figure from the G2A site and found that over 26,000 copies of their games were sold at half retail price. That amounts to about $200,000 in sales of half-priced games. A very large percentage of these were likely from stolen credit cards. And unfortunately, this happens way more frequently than you might think, but people only tend to talk about it when indie devs make a fuss or companies deactivate a large quantity of stolen game keys and the community gets upset. However, what's more upsetting to me is the fact that G2A makes a profit from stolen game purchases and shirks the responsibility to regulate their own stolen key market. Yep, that's correct. G2A makes money directly from stolen games and in more ways than one. Let's break down G2A's profit model to better understand how they make a shitload of money even if a giant percentage of their keys are stolen and even made invalid by publishers after the purchase date. Now, if you go to the G2A website and look at their table of fees, it looks like they take about 10.8% of a game's sale. But after you add up the listing cost, the product commission, the successful transaction fee, the transfer fee, and even the currency exchange fees, you're looking at around 20 to 30% of a game's sale going directly to G2A. The tiny step toward market regulation that G2A has made is called G2A Shield, which supposedly ensures your purchase. But unlike many other online markets such as eBay, who offer this protection free of charge, G2A uses it to further profit. The buyer can pay a fee for G2A Shield if you're worried that you might be purchasing a stolen key. But if you don't pay the extra $1.13 per transaction, G2A will not reimburse you for buying a stolen key even if it becomes invalidated. That's right, they will still take their 20 to 30% of what you paid for the stolen, ultimately useless product. Furthermore, their seller agreement states that if somebody buys a CD key and then needs to get reimbursed for fraud, and G2A detects that the seller has been up to fraudulent activities, they're entitled to take all the money out of their G2A wallet account, which could be far more than the actual stolen game. So G2A can actually profit very significantly from somebody selling a stolen game key. So they're quite literally stealing money from thieves whose thievery and scamming they facilitate. It's sort of like being the getaway driver in a bank heist. Sure, you're not the guy who's directly robbing the bank, but they facilitate the getaway and are taking a cut of the money when it's over. In an example of how this plays out, the TinyBuild blog interviewed a G2A merchant who makes $3,000 to $4,000 a month from selling stolen games. First, he gets access to a database of stolen credit cards from the dark web. Then he goes to bundle or third-party resellers to buy a ton of cheap games and then puts them up on G2A to sell at half retail price. This is done over and over with little to no repercussions from G2A. In fact, the worst case scenario for the thief at this point is that G2A catches him and takes any money that's still in his G2A wallet. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't appear that G2A is punishing or taking legal action against any of these scamming G2A merchants other than perhaps banning some accounts or taking money out of their wallets. G2A is blatantly facilitating a fraud-fueled economy and making money from illegally sold keys. I ran some numbers based on a Twitter poll of how often people pay the extra fee to use G2A Shield. The poll indicates that 30 to 40% of people use G2A Shield when they buy games. Using that metric, even in some of the worst case scenarios, G2A can still sell upwards of 40% stolen keys and still make a profit, since they are not legally obligated to refund on illegal sales unless you buy with G2A Shield. People like to argue that G2A's buy protections are the same as eBay and Amazon, but at least those companies investigate, refund, and regulate their selling economy as a necessity. No extra fee to make sure you're not getting screwed. Also, sellers on G2A can have hundreds of negative feedbacks from selling invalid game keys and still be top rated. Negative feedback on eBay is usually about how long shipping took or the product wasn't identical to the picture, as opposed to invalid key or fake product comments that you're likely to find on G2A seller feedback. There's only one instance in which I can think of in which G2A did in fact refund users who didn't use Shield. This was when Ubisoft simultaneously disabled thousands of illegally purchased Far Cry 4 keys that were sold through G2A and Kinguin. There was such a big uproar from the people who unknowingly bought stolen keys that G2A's only option to save face was to refund people who specifically complained about it. Ironically, when this news story broke back in 2015, instead of channeling these complaints toward G2A's unregulated market scheme, Ubisoft took a lot of heat for canceling the keys. This resulted in Ubisoft ultimately revalidating a lot of those keys at a significant cost to the company. Now, realistically speaking, how much does this actually affect the game market? I wanted to know, so I actually got in touch with several legitimate game reseller websites. And although they requested that I keep their names anonymous, the stories shared are most likely consistent throughout the entire online retail world. One of these websites talked about a sale that they put on where they sold all 15,000 keys of a game. However, 4,297 of those keys were purchased with fraudulent credit cards. That's almost a third of the total sales. Another retailer said when they sold $60,000 worth of keys, 14,000 of it was fraud, plus they got hit with $1,800 in chargeback fees. A really scary aspect of this is if retailers aren't fast enough to figure out which cards are fraudulent, the chargeback fees can actually be even higher than their sales figures. One of the same retailers said, and I quote, "3/4 of my team's #1 priority is to battle the fraud made possible by sites like G2A." And sure, these sites aren't directly stealing the games themselves, but you have to wonder, would people be stealing 4,000, 5,000 keys if they didn't have websites where they could easily and immediately turn a profit? Also, when legitimate retailers are given game keys to sell for a discounted rate, it's usually a limited number of keys. So when they sell out of their keys only to find out later that almost a third of those sales are fraudulent, they're basically limiting the number of legitimate gamers who would have been able to buy the game and play their games at the reduced sales price. Not to mention, it cuts into their sales figures drastically. Many of these game sales come from indie titles where losing a third of their profit or possibly more can have dire impacts on the future of their game development. As a gamer myself, I feel it's my responsibility to discourage people from using gray market key resellers such as G2A. By using them, you actively promote a business model that profits through thievery, disregards regional pricing, and will ultimately significantly obstruct game development, especially at the indie level. But how do we convince the gamer with only $5 in their pocket not to buy the $5 gray market game and instead save up to buy the verified retail price at $10? It's not an easy argument, and excusing the negative impacts of gray markets is easier to justify when you don't have a lot of income. I think a lot of change can be made by learning about how G2A hurts developers and gamers alike, but also changing the community mentality. I think many people see G2A as sort of like a Robin Hood company, robbing from the rich game developers and giving to the poor gamers. Sadly, it's much closer to robbing from the poor game developers and giving to the poor gamers while getting rich off of the robbery transaction fees. Others have defended G2A by comparing it to a pawn shop. The analogy being, if people rob houses and then sell the goods to a pawn shop, the shop is not ethically wrong for selling those goods if they didn't know they were stolen. This is a very misleading analogy for several reasons. First, since the houses are commonly insured, the owners are not completely devastated. Next, the house robbery hasn't upset a global gaming market. And finally, pawn shops require identification from sellers and operate under strict rules to avoid corruption and reselling of stolen goods. Plus, they have to give stolen goods over to the authorities when caught. G2A is a global pawn shop that outsells retailers, has a well-documented history of selling stolen goods, is exempt from having to return stolen goods when caught, and allows the robbers to repeatedly commit their crimes on their store. It blows my mind that legal action has not already been taken against them. So what can we, the gaming community, do to discourage sites like G2A? First, don't be quiet about it. Just as I imagine there will be some heated debates in the comment section of this video, make sure that debate carries elsewhere. You all have voices, make sure the right people hear you. Aside from just telling your friends, you can tell influential members of the gaming community who support G2A. I'm not proud to admit it, but last year I was briefly sponsored by G2A. I didn't do any research on the company, I just saw bigger YouTubers like PewDiePie were sponsored, so I figured they were probably an alright company to work with. Thankfully, the Ubisoft Far Cry key debacle happened not too long afterward, and many of my subscribers asked me not to support G2A. It prompted me to really do my research, and when I found out more about them, I backed out of my contract. The problem, of course, was my own ignorance, but it was aided by the strength in numbers mentality. Look at this list of G2A supporters. They have the biggest YouTubers and Twitch streamers locked into sponsorships. When you see PewDiePie, Ali A, and Lyric up there supporting G2A, without question, it gives a sense of trust in the brand. G2A has been very good about maintaining their brand image, and a lot of that has to do with butting up to the big guys. This involves huge contracts with some of the biggest influencers who can make well over $500,000 per year from the sales they generate on G2A using their coupon codes, not to mention the fixed contract amount. In addition to that, indie developers and big name publishers can take a stand against G2A as well. Ubisoft and EA have both canceled many stolen keys that have been sold on G2A or other key selling sites, yet as companies they work with and support community members who promote G2A. I call on all publishers to take a stronger stand against working with esports teams or YouTube/Twitch streamers who support a platform that facilitates game theft. Let them know that if they want to work with you on promotional opportunities or sponsorships, they will need to drop their G2A sponsors. The same goes for any other game developers. Are you sponsoring partners actively encouraging their fans to buy your games from gray market resellers? If so, reconsider your affiliation with these people or give them an ultimatum. If I knew that EA or Ubisoft didn't want to work with anyone affiliated with those companies, it certainly would have kept me from signing up with G2A in the first place. In addition to that, if developers can work together to set up better key tracking and universally ban game keys obtained via fraudulent credit cards, it would cut deep into the reputation of key resellers when consumers get their games revoked. Rather than letting one or two companies take a stand against these websites on their own and taking heat from the gray market community, standing together would create a much bigger impact and set an industry mentality for regulating gray market games. Legally speaking, I'm not even sure if developers can take action against companies who profit from knowingly stolen game codes, especially when their business operates primarily out of Hong Kong. And lastly, YouTubers and streamers can also take a stand against gray market games. Unfortunately, we are responsible for some of the biggest promotions of the G2A brand. I would ask PewDiePie, Ollie, and Lyric to renounce their G2A affiliations and get on the legitimate side of game promotions. You guys created an umbrella that allows many other G2A partners to feel justified in their support of the brand, just as I did. Denouncing the platform would send a strong message not only to potential G2A customers, but also to other influencers looking for the same kind of sponsorships. Anyway, I hope this video gives you some insight into the inner workings of key reseller websites and how they exploit an industry that has yet to take a strong stance against them. If you feel strongly about this issue, then please be vocal about it so that we can change the gaming industry for the better. And as always, I'll see you next time. This is LevelCap signing off.